One. Welcome to DG Academy. Tonight we are taking an inside look at Strata, which was an exciting experiment in immersive theater in Pittsburgh. My name is Roland Tec. I'm the Director of Membership at the Dramatists Guild. And I have to my right Gab Cody and Sam Turich, both of whom were co-creators of Strata, and we will get into more detail about that later. Let me just give you briefly just some brief biographical information. Gab Cody's plays have been staged at Quantum Theatre, Coconut Grove Playhouse, Williamstown Theatre Festival, Urban Stages, and Workshop Theatre in New York City. And Play Scripts recently published her comedy Fat Becket. Sam Turich, his directing credits include the world premiere of Fat Becket at Quantum Theatre in Pittsburgh. And in New York, Sam created Off the Top of Our Heads, winner of the Big Apple Improv Festival, The Second American Revolution, Prussia, 1866, The Magnificent Hour, Insecurity Guards, and Itamar Moses's Dorothy and Alice. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Strata, I thought it would be interesting to ask Gab and Sam to just briefly start by telling us how the citizens of Pittsburgh in the summer of 2012 first became aware of something called Strata. Like, how did it first emerge on the scene?
We began with an advertising campaign, and that campaign actually, I will immediately start with a side note and say they won an award, and Golden and a Silver Addy for the campaign. But we began with an ad campaign of glossy, slightly beatific but strange-looking people in tracksuits with descriptions of what could happen to you if you were refitnessed. But on the posters themselves, we just had phrases, I feel better, I want more.
And were these posters, where were these, like bus stops?
They were at bus stops. They were plastered all over town. We had large posters on buses.
What dimensions are we, are they as big as those things?
Some of them were covered this wall. In fact, they were as big as this poster space here that you have here. Mm-hmm. And some of them were on the back of buses. And there were posters on the back of buses that were black and said just one word, which was eye consciousness. And we had other posters that were compilations of these images. And those posters were about the size of this wall. And that's how I started, or not I started, but that's how eye consciousness was introduced to the population of Pittsburgh as an idea.
Oh, that's really tiny. What's that?
And these were all over the place before we said anything else about it.
Okay, so that was starting in July of 2012 or something? Okay.
I think we might have started in June.
June, okay. And then when did you start then adding to the mix this is something you can buy tickets to, and how did that get out?
We had a lot of conversations about how were we going to relay information to the public that this was something that they could actually attend, because we knew it wasn't a theater event in the most classical sense, but we also knew we wanted to sell tickets. So on the posters we had an address, which was stratapittsburgh.com.
Okay. And that website became live shortly after these posters?
At the same time.
At the same time. Okay, so then people would go to stratapittsburgh.com, and the first thing they would see is Strata, Pittsburgh's first refitnessing center, introducing eye consciousness. And then let's see.
The pathway to personal enlightenment starts here. Beginning today, our strategic training, research, and testing agency is open to all citizens of Allegheny County and its surrounding areas. Located in downtown Pittsburgh, the Strata Center is fully equipped to deliver cutting-edge, proto-corrective treatment to attain clearer, brighter, happier living. We encourage all interested candidates to purchase their admission to perfection today.
Okay. And then
some
now-
more of this.
Right, and then people would scroll down, and then I see their schedule an appointment today is in lieu of purchase tickets, schedule an appointment. Okay, so
And
that's
if you
cool.
kept scrolling down, you'd find
Oh.
some testimonials. These were live videos.
Are these all your actors? Are these your cast members?
Actually, many of those are my students, except for the little kids and the older gentlemen. But we created these images for the campaign before we cast the show.
Cool, because I was curious
There
about
are a
that.
couple of people in this campaign, or maybe just
Scotland.
Scotland, who's not on this screen.
You'll see him in the video, and he was cast in the show.
Okay, so I go to the website, and I'm curious enough to actually click schedule an appointment. And then I order my tickets, and then I believe I get an email with a link to a video. Is that right?
Yes.
I want to show people the video, and when you call up the video, I want to make sure it's ready, that Terry's on it before we start playing it. Terry, tell me when, because I want everyone who's live streaming to. Yeah? Okay, so let's play this, and we'll just watch.
Welcomes you to Strata. Your acquisition of eye consciousness is only possible through this Level 10 Zeta Refitnessing package. Please remember to come with your Level Works partner. Having a Level Works partner is one of the most effective ways of staying committed to your refitnessing program. GATE appreciates the referrals of its Strata members and shows this appreciation by rewarding them with clarity points. This website is a great resource for our members. Please review the 5 basic survival tips for your refitnessing experience. You are the keeper of your own perfection. I'd like to briefly explain another exciting benefit offered to all of our new members. Please repost to your destination as indicated in your refitnessing reservation email. Please arrive at the location and time indicated. Your safety and our anonymity are LevelWorks partners. Please speak to no one outside of your checkpoint contact coordinators. Should you be unable to attend your refitnessing, or should you, for reasons of lack of clarity, diminishment of temporal management, substance abuse, selfishness, or other unforeseen obligation obstacles, please contact the number indicated here and in your reservation email. Your checkpoint contact coordinator will provide further instructions. Please leave valuables that you are unable to leave in a locker on the Strata premises at home. Please dress comfortably. For your own safety, please refrain from tight-fitting clothing or high-heeled shoes. Congratulations. Your choices are Epsilon Magnetic. You are in motion. Eye consciousness is not only a state of eye.
Okay, wow, okay. And I just learned that, I don't know how I missed this, that STRATA stands for Strategic. What is it? Refitnessing?
Research.
Just back it up
Here,
slightly.
yeah. There it is.
Strategic
Testing,
Testing.
Research, and Training Agency.
Okay. Okay, so I see this video, and then assuming that I don't completely freak out,
Which some people did.
Well, that would just be an indication that you really needed to be refitnessed.
seriously in need
If
of
you
like
started freaking out, that would be
the
a good
hyper
indication.
epsilon level of refitnessing. Okay, so then I go to, what happens next?
Well, as she said in the video,
Yeah.
you were given a location to which you had to report at a certain time. And it said exactly who you were looking for? Is that
It
right?
said, look for someone. We gave them a description of the person, what they were wearing, and that they would be your checkpoint coordinator, contact coordinator,
And we gave you a password.
and a password. And at that point, you had to go through a test,
Okay,
a short test.
so, but this is, I just want to be clear, this is in a public place, right? It's like somewhere
It was
out on the
on,
street? Huh?
Boulevard.
Yeah, a corner in downtown Pittsburgh.
Okay, and then, so people would go, and then what was the language that you used for a partner?
A level works partner.
Level works partner, which is like a friend that you would go experience it with?
Yes.
Okay. And then the people get taken to the secret location so that nobody ever knows. How do they get taken there?
They meet their checkpoint contact coordinators named Freddie,
Okay.
and
It's always Freddie.
it is always Freddie.
Okay.
Thank you. I was going to save that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It is always Freddie. So they meet bus stop Freddie, who then takes them to the next Freddie, and that Freddie walks them down the street and
We
down
were right along one of the rivers in Pittsburgh. So
Right along
walk
one of the
along
rivers.
The river, past a couple of bridges,
into a long alley.
and Freddie would be sort of preparing you. He had a sort of patter that he would do to prepare you for the
Jeffrey
for the experience.
Carpenter, who is Bricolage. Bricolage is Jeffrey Carpenter and Tammy Dixon. And Jeffrey, really early on in all of our sessions, said he wanted to avoid lines. He didn't want people to ever approach the experience by lining up. And it was really a brilliant stroke of genius because it created the whole beginning part of our process in which no one ever lined up.
So everybody always felt like that it was completely about them. They were
Yes.
completely connecting
He
to
was-
the piece
Yeah, he was
themselves.
determined to leave the sort of box office experience out of it as well.
Cool.
So that it
All right.
wasn't a recognizable theatrical experience.
You would enter an intimidating alley, an intimidating, dank, dirty alley, and at the end of that alley, you would be guided by Freddie, and Freddie would open a door, and there would be someone else who would then step you into.
Nondescript gray metal door just in the side of a building.
And once you stepped into that space, you were in an almost spa-like reception area.
Find you a picture
Okay.
of that.
I just have to interrupt by, what is our Twitter, is it hashtag new play. So if you want to tweet questions, you can tweet questions at hashtag new play. Okay.
So this is what you would step into.
Okay, so you've come out of this grimy alley and then you come into this very pristine, nice, okay. And then...
And
Oh,
then...
can I just back up for a second? Because I think I left something out.
Okay.
Which is, people have filled out a questionnaire before as part of this, is that right?
Yes, when you buy a ticket and you watch that opening video, there's also a short questionnaire.
Okay, so, and the questionnaire contains some, like, essential, like, basic biographical information, or what sort of?
The questionnaire is padded with questions. I wouldn't describe them as nonsense questions, but questions. It's padded with a series of questions, and then there are a couple of biographical questions tucked in there.
Okay, and so, and again, a person could go alone, or they could go with a friend, but they could not go in a group of more than two people.
Nope.
Okay, all right, so then they're there, and take us through what happens here.
So they meet Freddie at the reception area, and she welcomes them in it is a very spa-like atmosphere. She asks you to put your belongings in a locked locker. She has you sign in, and she gives you a warm towel.
That's nice.
It was very soothing.
Okay, and does she make it clear that she knows who you are?
She
Yes.
welcomes you by name.
Oh, okay.
Then you and your LevelWorks partner are taken down the next hallway and given an MP3 player and headset with a meditation on it. So you sit in a quiet space by yourself and listen to a meditation on an MP3 player. Shortly after which you're collected by one of the guides and put on an elevator with your partner.
And now, is it at this point that the paths of people through the Strata experience can begin to diverge?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
The
Yes.
Yeah,
The
okay.
first room that you encounter is this one.
Wow.
This was a racquetball court.
Hmm.
Jeffrey Carpenter, again, who founded Bricolage and was really the mastermind of Strata. Bricolage, the word means making artful use out of what is at hand. And almost everything that you see in this photograph was found in the space that we were working in.
It wasn't found in this configuration.
No.
Right. And are you willing to tell us what the space had been before you were doing your show?
Well, this was the building had been, I think we can divulge that.
Okay.
It had been a Bally's Fitness Center.
Okay.
And so this space was a racquetball court, and Rob Long, who is an amazing designer, once we decided that this was going to be the archive room, and we decided that it was going to be filled with stuff, created this beautiful sculpture of stuff.
Okay. And who's this woman here?
She's the archivist.
And does she interact with?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So now here we get it. All right. So now I'm gonna back up a little bit, because now we're sort of getting into so you're starting to get a flavor for just how unusual this is. And Gab, I want to ask you, as a writer, can you talk a little bit about, like, the difference between, as a playwright, working on a normal play is one thing, but then this was like you wrote these pieces which allowed for a kind of give and take, right? So how did you go about that? How did you sort of...
Well, I've given some thought to this whole process, because it was the first time I've ever written something like this. It's the first time something like this is exactly like this has existed. And I've thought about my own process if I write a play on my own, and how I think about a subject, or I research it, and then I synthesize that research and thought, and I turn that into a piece of writing. But in this case, because it was collaborative writing, we talked as a group of artists in detail over a long time. We shared source materials, and then I had to synthesize that group collaboration, so that conversation. And that's not unusual. I mean, collaborative groups often will have a writer who synthesizes what they've done. So I had to synthesize all of that, and I would bring in answer to your question, I would bring in scenes in which I had written the part of the participant. So I wouldn't write exactly what they said, but I would leave the space for them to say something, and then write a reaction as though they had said things within a certain vein. And so it was an act of sort of writing and then improvising for myself what the possibilities could be that a person might say, and then what reaction to any number of possibilities would be effective. And so it was a strange process. And then sometimes we would workshop those. So I'd bring in a scene, and Sam and I would sit down, and I would read the scene with the archivist, and someone else would play along as though they were a participant, and we would see how that would go.
And how many people were there? How many of you were there, like, sort of working on this from the beginning?
The initial group was 6 or 7, and then we gradually brought more people into the fold after we had a clearer idea of exactly what we were going to do.
We had an opening group of Tammy Dixon, Jeffrey Carpenter, Sam Turich, Nina Sarnelli, Riley Harmon. Riley Harmon was the lead artist on the project, and Riley and Nina are both artists who came out of the CMU MFA program. And although I've sometimes described them as conceptual artists, they defy labeling, because the CMU program says they turn out artists. So, so the group of those two artists, Tammy, Jeffrey, Sam, and I, and then the other Bricolage staff, creative staff, was also involved, and then Rob Long, the designer, Andrew Paul, who's a sound and technical designer as well, was there for part of the time. He introduced...
Game designer.
Yeah, he's a game designer. He actually introduced the idea of video game logic into some of our conversations, and we ended up utilizing that.
So, Sam, did you audition actors once you knew?
There was an audition process that I was not involved in because I was working on another project at the time.
I was involved in it as Tammy, Jeffrey, and I. We cast the show.
Okay, and so you had the core group, and then you wanted to supplement, and you... Did you
Well,
have
actually, I don't think anybody in the core group was in the cast
Oh.
of the show. We conceived of it. Tammy and Jeffrey and I shared directorial duties, and then we cast the show with people who came to auditions.
Wait, so you shared directorial duties. Can
Yes.
you talk a little bit more about, like, how do you rehearse for something like this?
That's an excellent question. The main thing that we did was worked with the ensemble to create with them and help them to understand what the entire piece was going to be like for them as they experienced it and for the participants as they experienced it. We did a lot of ensemble building exercises. What we knew eventually was going to happen was the cast would arrive, like any cast arriving for a night that they were going to do a performance. But then, once they went off to their individual rooms, they would not really be able to interact with each other again over the course of the evening. They'd be passing the participants off to each other from room to room. So one of the major challenges that we faced was, how do you create a single ensemble that is living in the same world when they'll be performing basically solo? It was like we were doing 25 solo shows all at the same time, but we wanted them all to live in that same world. So lots of ensemble building, lots of talking, lots of explaining. Every night after the performances, after the rehearsals and after the performances, we'd get everybody together back in the room again to discuss what we'd learned, what we'd figured out, what we were terrified of, what was going well. And that's how we kept the group together.
Did different actors start to, I imagine part of it is they were also developing their characters, right,
Mm-hmm.
in the rehearsal process? So I'm wondering, like, did different characters gradually evolve slightly different relationships to the strata philosophy?
Oh, definitely. And there was a question I remember from the actors early on, which was, are we employees of Strata, or do we just exist as figments who live in these rooms? What they wanted to know what their relationship to this, to the Gate Corporation, which I haven't mentioned. The Gate Corporation
Right.
is the corporation that started the whole Strata. I think each of the actors had an individual experience, and I think it was very intense for many of them. We actually have an actor here this evening, but I think that they had to perform in a very special way because unlike other immersive theater experiences where a piece of the show will go on in front of the audience and the audience might move in and out of it, we asked our actors to interact directly with the audience in groups of one or sometimes two, and that interaction was, I know it was pretty trying on the actors. It's a pretty intense thing to ask of someone to perform something over and over with individuals in a small space. And I will say that I wrote for particular actors. Once I knew them. Cassie, who's here this evening, I knew her before the show, and so when we thought about what she was going to do, I knew her, and I thought, oh, well, she'll be really wonderful in this particular room.
There she is.
And
Is that
so,
Cassie?
That's
yes,
Cassie.
and
Cassie,
that's
can you
Cassie.
come up and sit here? Do you mind? Because that way I could ask you a question
So,
or two. Cassie Bremer. Cassie
Hello.
Bremer, right?
Yeah.
Oh, thank
You
you.
can, yeah,
Thanks.
scoot
You
over
can
and
share
scoot close to
okay,
me.
we can all share my.
When you first entered Cassie's room, this is what you'd see. It was a beach. The floor was covered with sand. You were asked to remove your shoes before entering the room so you could feel the sand under your feet. And there, in a bed on the beach, was a beautiful blonde in a white shift.
And
And then you'd meet Cassie.
And Cassie, what did your, before we talk about the audience experience, I'm just curious, what did your script look like? Was it?
My script was unlike a lot of the other scripts because mine was it was a monologue that directed the participant as to what to do. It wasn't really a question to answer. It was more of a, do this, now do this. Do you remember when this happened?
And did you have people who really didn't want to play along, who
Oh, yeah.
gave you a lot of, so did your playwright or your director give you like sort of an arsenal of things to use? I mean, how did you prepare for that, or is it possible to prepare for that? Maybe?
No, it's not possible to prepare for that. No, I guess the main thing, because my room was very intimate. May I divulge? I'll hold off. It was an intimate experience.
I'll do this if you go too far.
Okay, it was an intimate experience where basically I invited you in. I described a memory that we shared that was upsetting to me, and then I asked you to join me on the bed and play with my hair. And the conversation, it was never really a conversation. Well, it was sometimes, because people wanted to talk to me because it was such an intimate and sometimes sexual. I don't know. Yeah, sometimes it was it was intimate. We'll just say that.
It wasn't sexual. There was sexual tension.
There was sexual tension.
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're clear about that. But did it must have been very different if there were two people versus one person. Or did you only get one person at a time?
Depending, I sometimes had two people.
Oh, okay.
There was an out.
Because
if people were very uncomfortable, they could travel with a partner, but they normally ended up splitting up at some point anyway. I only had two people in my room at one point.
Because your level works, what is it called? Your level works?
Level works partner.
You and your level works partner inevitably get split up during the experience? Right, okay. So
Actually, pretty much right away.
Oh,
we would separate people, and there would be occasions where you might, down a long hallway, see your level works partner again, but you wouldn't be reunited until the end of the experience.
Okay. So now, I mean, you must have had someone who refused to get in the bed with you, right?
I had one woman. There was one woman specifically who would not. Pretty much everybody else did. She refused, and she said, my husband better not either.
To which you said, he did already.
To which I replied, who?
Okay, and so there, like, were you improvising?
Oh,
or? Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of improv here.
Well, when we looked, Cassie's a wonderful improviser, and when we looked for actors and went through the casting session, we particularly looked for people who both were very committed, authentic performers because it was such an intimate experience. So they had to be people who you believed. And they also had to have improvisational skill. They had to feel comfortable improvising because it didn't matter how much I wrote the script. There would be some event that in order to fully engage with the performance, the performer would have to improvise.
And weren't there cases where you had like a whole few pages of material written and you had actors who said like...
I overwrote a scene for a woman who would wash your hands. So you would go into the restroom and she was the bathroom attendant and she would wash your hands. And I wrote her about 3 pages, but once we determined the timing of the evening, we realized it could only really be about 3/4 of a page. But she really liked the material, and it was all about her and all about a story that she was telling. So as the show progressed, she would choose which part of this 3-page monologue to deliver to which participant.
So it's interesting because, every actor on every stage responds to an audience, right? I mean, it's just like an inevitable part of theater, and you're taking it to just like a new one step further. You're giving them like 5 pages of material, and they're going to do like 60% of it, depending on who they're...
I really couldn't be attached. I told them I think that my note to the actors was embrace the chaos.
So for the actor, I'm just curious, Cassie, like on a given night, this show being done all day, all afternoon, all night? Like, what was your day like? Were you there for 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours? I mean...
Call was at 6, I believe. Call was at 6 o'clock, and our first participants arrived 7-ish. And then I left sometimes 11:30.
Okay, so it's a long haul for you. And then also, for the audience member, some of them are encountering you near the beginning of their journey, others of them are encountering you near the end of their journey, right? So their whole emotional, the whole shape emotionally of the journey depends on the order of rooms they go into, is that
Well, and
right?
some would never encounter her at all because
Who decides that? How does that get
Yes,
determined?
Roland, you're looking lovely this evening.
Oh, we're not supposed to know. I need some refitnessing. Okay, sorry.
That remains a question.
Okay, that will.
We had a couple of expressions we would use all the time, and that remains a question. is
But
one of them.
physically, if I'm in one room, and then I assume that the interaction with one or two actors in one room comes to a close,
You're always given a choice.
somebody's going to move me out of that room into the hall and to the next
You're
room.
always given a choice, and depending on your choice or your behavior in the room, you would then move to another room.
I see. Okay. Got it. And some people make epsilon magnetic choices and others do not.
Exactly right.
And
yes.
you would be given something that very clearly indicated where you should go next.
Okay. And then, but nobody would ever end up accidentally stumbling into the same room twice. That was, you made sure that didn't happen.
Pretty much, yeah. And if we also made an effort to give, if people returned, and several people did come back to do it again, we made an effort to give them a different experience the second time through to make sure that they'd meet different people and see different rooms.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of managing. Like, I mean, talk about stage management. That's like a whole
Yes.
jigsaw puzzle of its own. So talk to me about what's the end. Wait. What?
I don't know what
No,
they're
no.
Oh, what's the end of there's something interesting at the end with a bar and some music or something. What's going on there? What people go through all this experience and then what happens at the end?
So here's a room, the doctor room, where
You'd go through an examination with a doctor.
in this room your answers would be recorded. So you would be asked about your level works partner in this room, and your answers would be recorded, and you would meet this gentleman at the end of your experience after
at a bar at the end of your experience.
and your favorite song would be playing.
Okay, because you forgot that 3 weeks ago when you ordered tickets, you filled out a form, and in the form they asked you what was your favorite song,
Yeah.
right?
Often people wouldn't even realize
Right.
that their favorite song was played.
They wouldn't even notice. Now, if you have two people who went together, they're not both there at the same time.
They'll be in eventually. They'll get there, but they don't arrive there at the same time.
It was. I was just going to say, it was always a really magical moment when people were reunited and realized that they hadn't had the same experience.
And then are people sort of shoved out the door in some way, or
We had a long discussion about whether that was
Many
going to be the end of the
hours.
experience.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
what were you debating about
I'll
that?
say something brief, and then you should. I'll just say that one of the things that we talked about early on was what was the point of this experience for the participants, and we wanted to send them into the world questioning whether everything wasn't indeed part of strata, so that they would have an experience that would be intense enough that they would leave the experience and feel that the experience was going on. And that did happen, actually, several times to people who thought that we had created experiences well beyond the physical space that we had created it in. And we would get emails and calls, and
Wait.
why did you put that person in the
Really?
parking garage? I know that person in the parking garage was definitely part of your...
Really?
Oh, yeah. They'd leave the experience, they'd walk out on the sidewalk and be like, oh, that person is definitely...
Another of our catchphrases was, "You are in the experience now." That was something that you heard many times over the course of the evening. And it's something that we continue to say to each other because we continue to be in the experience. Please. Yeah.
I continue to say it to participants. I've had strangers come up to me in the grocery store and touch my hair.
Really?
Absolutely. And my response is always, "You're in the experience now." And I'll walk away really quick. I just don't know how else to respond, honestly.
I have to say that people did. We had one participant who came to us and said, "I'm so happy I saw the show, although my friend begged me not to come because she said it was a cult and that people were getting indoctrinated." And we thought this was fantastic. I mean, we created a theater show that people thought was a cult. I just thought that was...
That makes a great segue. Can we show the anti-strata video? Okay, so before we show it, I just want to... Well, actually, let's just show it, and then you'll explain what we're seeing. All right?
Here we go.
And I have to mention that we had wonderful collaborators, Hannah.
I'll show you this
Nielsen
first
Jones
quickly.
and,
So there was an anti-campaign that had a Twitter feed. It was against strata. And on the Twitter feed, you'd find lots of information that they had dug up on Strata and the Gate Corporation.
The dirt on
The
strata.
dirt on
Yeah,
Strata.
okay.
And there's there was a leaked video that someone had made. Let me see if I can make this bigger. This was an operative had infiltrated.
Hey, you can't be in here.
Okay. Okay, so was put on the internet and all right, okay.
And there was a whole anti-campaign.
And you
actually
masterminded that, or how did you?
Well,
you all?
I have to say that it was definitely a collaborative effort, and Riley Harmon,
If you look-
Jeffrey, Tammy, everybody who was involved, we definitely all talked through it. One of the
This-
things that we liked about it
this
was that
down
it gave
here. There was a tiny link down here, Strata Lies, and if you click that will take you sort of through the looking glass to
Okay.
Yeah.
to the
And one of the things that we really liked about
Okay.
it was that it gave the whole project history, because you have to be around a while to have an anti-campaign.
Right, right.
We really liked that
Yeah,
idea.
right. So it implied that
The leader
There
of
was a
the
history.
anti-campaign was named Rob Clifton, and by the second or third week of Strata, Rob Clifton was loose in the building.
And abducting people through the experience, so,
Oh,
yeah.
so he was messing up their experience.
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
And often he also existed as a corrective for participants who would go rogue.
Okay. So now, Bricolage is known for doing site-specific work, yes? I mean, well, maybe not, I don't know, but when I was in Pittsburgh, I remember that I went to see something at Bricolage, and the space was their space which had been reclaimed. It had been like a sauna or something, right?
Something like that.
So I don't know.
Bricolage is actually, I would say that Strata was a launch pad for a movement into more immersive pieces. They had done immersive pieces before. Certainly they had taken people through multiple interesting experiences outside of their own space, and they have done site-specific theater. I think Strata has moved the company more in that direction. There are projects on the horizon that will also be immersive projects, and the question is, we don't do Strata again, you do something else. And so they are certainly, I think that Jeffrey and Tammy are really amazing artists, and they are engaged in this community and internationally. So they've traveled a lot. They've experienced LARPs, which are
Live
LARPs.
action role play.
Oh,
games.
okay.
and other shows that they've been inspired by, and so they're really a guiding force in Pittsburgh, certainly, and I think nationally. I mean, they really are wonderful artists, and they bring people into the process. And
I wanted to ask about the space, because it's just, was the whole thing, well, or I guess what I want to ask is, like, it's a kind of a chicken and egg thing. Was it like the space, and then you tried to create something to maximize the use of that unusual space? Or did you have the idea, did you all have the idea and you went searching for that abandoned Bally's Fitness?
Again, it was really the space, that was Jeffrey and Tammy. And they had the idea of doing a show in a space. And then they looked for spaces that might be useful. They found a space, and I think around the time that they found the space, they approached Sam and me about our involvement, and it had a huge gym.
Is this just another example of, like, how Pittsburgh is so much cooler than New York? I mean, like, in the sense of, like, because I have this...
I thought we were just taking that as read.
I have this idea that, like, in Pittsburgh, and maybe I'm, correct me, if I'm wrong, but that in Pittsburgh, there's all this real estate, and that the city is, like, invested in opening doors to artists and saying, here, this is abandoned, let's use it, let's maximize its potential.
Yeah,
Is that true?
I think that it's chicken and egg. The artists know that those spaces are available, and then it's a matter of figuring out who owns the space or who's in control of it, and going to them. And when artists come to those people and say, we have this idea, there's a lot of buy-in from the community, from real estate people. The Pittsburgh Cultural Trust is a hugely influential force in town that does have a lot of contacts with the real estate.
And they
all over the
were
city and
a
downtown.
co-sponsor of this, of Strata, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so and did they hold this real estate? Was this part of
I'm
their?
not sure. Is that the case?
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, all right. So do you both feel like you now have the bug, the immersive theater bug, and you want to do more of this kind of thing, or?
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to reach people on a level that going to the theater and sitting down and watching a play doesn't. And we mentioned before that video games are interactive, the internet is interactive. The way people have just so quickly over the last 20 years become accustomed to picking and choosing the ways that they will interact with their entertainment means that as theater artists, we're looking for ways to meet the audience in the way that they have learned they want to be met. And that's one of the reasons why this project was exciting for us, and why we're interested in continuing to work in this way. We're also, we'd never leave the theater as well, but we are seeing ways in which the play that Gab is writing and directing right now has lots of interactive elements that I don't know if they come directly to us from Strata, but there are definitely things that we learned from the experience of Strata that now that we're in a proscenium theater, we're using to keep the audience engaged and involved in a way that is, I think, more interesting for a contemporary audience than just sitting in the dark and watching a show.
Does that mean you're building in intentionally, like, more forks in the road in the storytelling, or like?
Well, I'll tell you this. I am doing a production right now, and it's in a very old theater in Pittsburgh. And what I've heard is that theater is going to be torn down fairly soon. They're building a new theater, and it's very, very old theater. And I actually said to the cast, we're going to do a site-specific show, but the site happens to be a theater, which I find amusing because it's just silliness, but it's also very true. That how do you look at a space? And this is not new. We're cycling back
Right. I mean,
to
we have
an
Vanya
idea.
on 42nd Street,
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
the obvious.
And we're cycling back to ideas that they were using in the Open Theater and well before then. And, so these are not, the concept of taking theater out of a theater is not an original idea, but I do think it's progressed with the way that we interact with media and the way that what is viewership, what does it mean for you to be part of an audience, what is an audience. I think all of those things are definitely affecting the way that I think about my writing, and also the way that I write is now. I find that I'm very collaborative. I often write collaboratively, and I was really thrilled to work with this team of people that was also comprised of artists, and to have that synthesis of ideas coming from people who I wouldn't normally have thought would be part of my process. So
how many artists were there? I mean, you're talking about now visual artists also, right?
Yes.
So how many? I mean, you said Jeffrey, right?
Well, Jeffrey was one of the directors, and Tammy
And
was
really
one of the
really
directors, the producer.
The conceiver. Producer
Conceiver.
of the
But
whole
doesn't
project.
Tammy also do a lot of, am I remembering this correctly? Like when they do the radio plays, does Tammy do the sound?
She does.
She
She's
does.
Their
Well,
regular
Tammy
folio.
actually, I should correct our earlier statement and say that Tammy did contribute to the show itself, because at some point during the show there was a very old telephone booth, and you might receive a phone call.
In the telephone booth.
Yes, and it would be.
Or rather, the phone would start ringing in the telephone booth, and you were the only person nearby. So it was your job to
Oh, neat.
answer the phone.
And that was Tammy.
Oh, yeah?
I should probably not reveal that.
It's too late.
Too
I think
late
it's too
now.
late.
Okay. So who were some of the other artists? And I mean, is there a costume designer?
There's a costume designer, Rob Long, I mentioned earlier, Hannah Nielsen-Jones, who's worked on theater like this before. They're a big group of people. I mean, for me, I think as a writer, I definitely began to, through the process of writing Fat Beckett, certainly, and then into this process, I have had a letting go of my idea of what traditional theater means to me. I mean, I still enjoy theater in its most traditional sense, but I lately have actually found myself itching a bit, even sometimes when I go to the theater, because I think that there's an immediacy that is often lost in performance, and that immediacy is something that Sam and I grew up with because we grew up into the theater through improvisation. And so we always had this idea that whatever happened in a performance would only happen that evening, and that would be a very special experience, and therefore unlike anything that you could consume in TV or film or any other medium that was recorded. So that improvisational background has been the foundation for how we've made written work. You know, it's that there's an immediacy to the performance and to the evening and to the moment of the show. So even though I'm writing a show right now, I'm putting in improvisational elements into it, so it will be different every show. And I like that. I like the experience of being part of something where you can feel the energy of the unexpected.
And it makes the theater making maybe a little bit more like sculpture, maybe? I mean, I don't know. You have like a lot of different elements that you're kind of playing with? I don't know.
If it was made of modeling clay, so it never
What?
dried.
What?
If it
No.
was made of modeling clay and never dried, that would be.
Yes, right. Like an
So you
oil
could smash
painting
it at the
versus
end.
acrylic or something. I don't know. Anyway, should we open it up to questions from either the Twitter world or the real world? If you're on Twitter, our hashtag is newplay, right? Okay. And does anybody here in the room have a question? Yes. Kat?
I'm very interested in the elements that you're bringing from Strata now into a show that's in theater.
Okay.
Could you elaborate on what you learned doing Strata? Translating that?
I'm going to repeat the question so that people can hear. Okay, so the question is, could you elaborate more specifically about what you've learned from having done Strata that you're now bringing into more traditional theatrical setting?
Well, I think that the idea that the experience of seeing the show begins as soon as the audience member enters your realm is really important. And with this show that I'm writing now, I couldn't control the way that the audience bought their tickets, and I couldn't control the way that they first heard about the show in the way that we did with Strata. But what I could do is base my writing behavior on what I knew their expectations would be and create an experience for them that started as soon as I was able to have them available to me. So I think that that's part of it, is looking holistically at the creation of theater as something that everything is the show. And I'm not talking about lobby performance. I'm not talking about bringing actors improvisationally into the lobby and making them interact with the audience, although that is certainly something that you could do. But I think Strata helped me conceive of what the onus is on the writer or the creator to lead the audience participant through the process immediately. I think so often we go to the theater and it's a series of steps, and those series of steps sort of lull us into an attitude about how we're going to experience something. And so I'm interested, as others before me have been, in how to break up that those expectations that have become so solidified.
When you say a series of steps, do you mean I walk into the theater, I get my playbill, I sit down, the lights go down, the curtain comes up, the lights go up, somebody enters on stage? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Where have you seen a curtain go up in the last?
Broadway, but other than that, yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah. Curtains are expensive.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, but that's what you mean?
I mean that. How do you purchase your ticket? How do you hear about the show? How do you, when you walk into the space, what happens? Then, right, the curtain doesn't go up because there aren't curtains, but the show begins, and then people talk, and then there are scenic movers who move the scenery, and then there are, and it's, and this is not all. This is certainly not all performance. I'm not making blanket statements, but I find that the theater against which I would describe we are working or building our forms is theater where the play is sort of a discrete element of your evening.
Right.
And the play may even pause so that the scenery can be adjusted, and then that's not the play. Or there are so many elements of the experience that are discrete, and then now we're interacting again with this, and now we stop, and now we're asleep. And again, I'm not saying that this is all theater, but I'm saying that there are these constructs that are repeated enough that they become traditional.
We're determined that no one fall asleep.
No one, right.
When they come to one of us.
But you just made me think of something else that's strange and interesting about this, is that, when you go to see a play, you also have the experience of, at intermission or even at the end of the play, walking out, you're talking with people about the experience, you're overhearing other people talk about the experience. And with Strata, it was very much sort of a lonely kind of relationship to this
Well,
piece.
at the end, you joined with a big bunch of people. So when you left your final experience, you joined a bar, and there were all of the people who had been in your cohort, for lack of a better word. So anyone who had entered the space at a certain time, you would encounter. And then people talked all about it. Oh, did you go to the beach room and play with that girl's hair?
Okay.
No, I didn't. You touched her hair. And then
Did you think
did you see the grandma?
Did you consciously think about that? Because,
definitely.
it seems to me that's, not to be too crass, but from a marketing point of view, it seems like it's important for people to kind of, for word of mouth, to fuel word of mouth by having people have an opportunity to go, oh my God, that was unbelievable, or something, right?
No, but you're you are pointing to something. We did make an effort to allow people to talk with each other and to compare notes after the show, and yes, to generate word of mouth. We also, and this is something that we've been thinking a lot about, realized that the group catharsis that is so much a part of what makes great theater, in an experience like Strata is not something that's going to happen because you're not part of an audience that is one big group of people all experiencing the same piece of performance together.
As writers and directors, I have to say it was really strange because we couldn't ever watch the show with the participants.
Okay.
So
I just have to say, we received a tweet here, which I feel, I guess, I have an obligation to read, okay? This is from Lies, Pittsburgh. Lies, Strata, not a theatrical performance. This is just a mask. Hashtag new play lies.
I think that person needs to be refitnessed, and if they would immediately return to a facility and continue their refitnessing program, they would reach eye consciousness and not be so blurry.
You are the keeper of your own perfection.
Absolutely.
Okay, now tell me about this beautiful ass we're looking at here.
There was a peep show at Strata.
Really?
And, yeah, really. And it was there was a surprise involved with the peep show.
Okay, but you're not going to tell us. No, don't tell us.
I'm not going to
Don't
tell you.
tell us.
But
All right.
there was a surprise involved, and it was. We were looking for lots of different kinds of situations that were fraught, that
Made people have to choose, make a decision.
are you going to look or are you not going to look? What does it mean if you look? What does it mean if you choose not to?
Well, I choose to look
Yes.
at that, just I'm saying, for the record. Okay. Wait, are there two actors there?
No, that's a
It's
mirror.
a mirror. The whole space was filled
Wait,
with
that's
mirrors.
a mirror?
So you're seeing in
Several
the
mirrors.
foreground, you're seeing the behind of the person, and then in the background there on the left is the mirror image of that person.
Oh, well, there's a surprise.
Yeah, that's the surprise.
That's a great surprise. Okay.
This is
Scotland.
the monk, yeah.
Scotland was in our advertising campaign, and he
And-
played a monk. And after you visited Cassie, she would send you to her brother, who was a monk.
Oh, and he...
This was a beautiful.
What
We don't
did
have
he-
a picture of this space, but it
so-
was really
And what did
fantastic.
he do?
He did not speak. He would spend time with you. He was a very beautiful soul. Scotland has a very beautiful soul, and he would be with you silently. He would pray.
He
with
has
you.
a beautiful soul,
does.
or his Strata persona has a beautiful soul?
but Scotland mostly.
Okay.
Well, the reason Scotland could pull this off is he's just
Oh.
a lovely human being. So you'd pray, you'd bow to the floor and pray, and then he.
I mean, this is all, I'm sorry, this just raises an interesting question, because, it's like the tempting thing for an actor is like, you have to get the person to pray with you. How do you do it without miming, or, he's not allowed to speak. So how does he, each person
Did you
is like a
wanna say
new
something? You
experiment.
seemed like you
It's
wanted to answer.
fascinating, right?
It was very interesting to me because we were in a close
Adjacent.
proximity. We were in an adjacent room, and I could tell what was happening in his room, basically. So as the
You could hear or just feel, or?
I couldn't hear anything because there was giggling sometimes, but it was almost as soon as Scotland did something, there was just from your point in your experience, you knew to follow along, and people were so good about just doing what he wanted because you immediately meet him. The first thing he does is make eye contact with you, and it's a very intense eye contact that says, I am your friend. And then you just go from there. And it was really interesting to hear people's experiences with him. It would go from kind of an uncomfortable giggle to a very just silent agreement that this is what's happening, and that's fine.
Wow.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, last night I went to an immersive theater thing at the Japan Society, and we were going from room to room to room, and this woman who was one of the actors, she had this amazing, quiet, commanding way of, like, when it was time for us to move to another space, she would just look at us and she would go. I mean, I'm actually not doing it the way, she was just like, just very subtle. It was amazing. Like, it's incredible, like, how people can...
We had wonderful, wonderful
And you
performance.
wrote to their strengths, so there was something about him that made you think, like, I want to give him silent work. Yeah?
Well, he had been in a mask and movement class that I taught
Oh.
for a while, so I knew
Okay.
him well.
And you sometimes had two actors together, or no?
Rarely.
Usually they were alone.
The peep show had a bouncer.
Yeah, but he was outside, so he'd send you in.
And then were there also sort of ushers, or were those also actors?
Once you enter the Strata facility, Roland, and participate in refitnessing towards gaining eye consciousness, your experience will be facilitated by many, sometimes checkpoint coordinators, sometimes facilitators, but those people will help you with your experience if need be.
How did you come up with some of your language, like refitnessing, checkpoint contact coordinators?
Well, one of the first things that Jeffrey did was he tasked me to write the gate language.
So you created, like, almost
So I
like
created the language of the corporation. So that was the first thing that I did. I had a wonderful source, which was I had a bunch of health club manuals. And so I read those quite a bit. And there's just some wonderful sort of tone of lingo in there.
Like, how did they strike you? Like, I guess it's all about, like, betterment and...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I built the language of the Gate Corporation, and I came in with expressions. I came in with expressions that facilitators could use, and monologues from some of the voiceover monologues that people would use. And so that was one of the very first things that Jeffrey asked me to do, which was create a comprehensive language of the corporation that can be used everywhere.
Did you ever have anybody deviate from the language?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, okay, first of all, you can never control actors as much as you want to as a writer. As much as you want to as a writer, to get up onto the stage and tell them something. So in this environment, there was even less control, and there was an agreement that there would be an improvisational element. So therefore, people did deviate, and I don't even know the extent of those.
Again, couldn't see the show.
Couldn't see the show. I was told that one of our checkpoint coordinators took to relaying information in a way that was entirely different that we had originally determined as the experience progressed. So there were some things that were absolutely within our control, but the show, we sometimes think about what would have happened if the show had run for another 4 months, because the show was an organism, or this piece was an organism in which the participants created an element of it, and people started coming back, and they started planting objects around the space, and they started buying into the anti-campaign, and they started creating a whole...
They started leaving stuff behind in the space?
Yes. It
you
was an
didn't-
organism.
Wow, that's incredible. And you didn't clean it up or anything?
Well, I didn't clean it
No,
up,
but I
but
mean-
I was doing something else at that moment.
Okay. All right, we have a question from Sarah Tuft. Thank you, Sarah. Gab, to what extent were you able or interested in shaping experience via traditional 3-act structure? Oh, in the strata thing.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Well, as Cassie mentioned, there were elements that fell into patterns that I couldn't necessarily determine. So if someone might come to Cassie's room early, or they might come to Cassie's room late in their experience. However, there was definitely a beginning that led you through to the sort of the end of the first act of your experience, and then a series. I knew what experiences would be in the second act, and I knew how the experience ended. Actually, Nina Sarnelli, who's a wonderful artist who is part of the group, she really devised the penultimate experience, which then led you into the bar experience at the end. So, there was a certain amount of information that I had, and that we all had. I mean, we all discussed how we would lead people, because through an experience that would have an arc and that would have an effect on them. So we discussed this at length as a collaborative group and did our best to create a structure that began someplace and had an arc, had heightening within it, and then led folks through to the end. So.
Were there some room ideas you had that you threw away?
Oh, yes, many.
Lots of them, yeah.
Do you want to share one?
There was one that was supposed to take place on a moving train. And we just couldn't figure out a way to, one of the things that we talked about a lot, and that Riley Harmon, who's the lead artist and an amazing conceptual artist, and I worked, we tried to get the train car room to work, and we couldn't figure out a way that it wouldn't be obviously not the train car. And what we managed to accomplish with almost every room was a sense that something real is happening here. And he and I worked together on one of the rooms, which involved a test that the participant had to take that involved watching videos. And he found videos that were increasingly, they were all real, they were all very gory, and the participant was prompted to continue watching increasingly gory videos. And this was something that we developed from a place where originally we had been calling it the torture room, and we wanted to enact a moment of torture, and we were guided by the is it the Skinner box? The
E.F. Skinner?
I think so.
Yeah.
The experience that they had put test subjects through. If you press this button, you're torturing someone.
Oh, you mean Milgram, right?
Is that Milgram?
Yeah.
Thank you. And we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked for a way that we could do that. Although we knew that there was a certain hump of suspension of disbelief that we were never going to be able to truly get over. That everybody would always know that it wasn't real. That the idea that you were actually torturing someone through a wall or something like that wasn't real. So.
And that, you make a good point, which is that we really strived to create immersive experiences that people could give way to, right? That they could suspend.
So it actually sounds like, in a way, you were trying to create something where people would not have to actively suspend their disbelief, but you would just be kind of...
Something like the peep show was sort of like that.
Well,
it was ultimately you are peeping through a peephole at a scantily clad person. So you are doing that. That is actually really happening. Now, you know that this is part of the experience that's been created for you, that you're not in a strip club, but you're in something that's like a strip club, and you're looking through a peephole at someone who has agreed to be there, but you actually have to make the decision about whether you're going to look through this hole at the person who's on the other side of it. So there's something both you understand that's not real about the experience, but there really is a scantily clad person on the other side of the hole. And you get to decide whether you're going to look through the hole of the person or not.
What made some people got really angry, right?
A few. It happened.
I'm wondering what kinds of things pushed people's buttons.
Well, I'll give you the thought that some of us have thunk, which is that we like to describe the experience as a mirror. The space was filled with mirrors, and the participants were required to participate. And I think that some people, I mean, I know even for myself as a writer that going through the experience, I could never have the experience that a participant could, ever. I went through, and although it required this intimacy and it required you to really give way and relax into what was happening, I personally couldn't do it because I was sitting there thinking, oh, I really have to shorten that. No, okay, that works. Okay, well, that's not what I said. No, I should tell them not to improvise. Oh, no, that's okay. And so that was my, my experience of it. And I think that I love, of course, that people had really strong reactions, that some people loved it and some people hated it, because why make anything that people aren't going to feel passionately about one way or the other, right? So I loved that some people hated it, although I think that the reasons they did, probably varied a bit. But I would probably boil it down to there was something about having to give way to the experience that was upsetting to them. What would you say, Sam? Or Cassie, maybe?
I think that's right. What do you think, Cassie?
For me, for my room specifically, I think people really had to come to terms with the fact of whether or not they were comfortable with themselves enough to be intimate with a stranger in a real way. And I think my personal experience was I learned a lot about humanity as an actor through the process, and seeing the way that a married man reacted to sitting on a bed next to me versus a young man in college versus a woman in her late 60s, which was the most beautiful experience of my life, actually. She sat down and she held me, and I actually just cried.
Wow.
It was beautiful. But I think it really forced you, I think the arc of the play, as I would see it, if I had gone through it, I of course never can, but you have an arc within yourself emotionally to see how far that you will let yourself go and how far you will let yourself be challenged in a real way, because you weren't an actor. You were going in as yourself, being confronted with experiences like in my room where you had to comfort me, and if you didn't comfort me, what does that say about you?
Right.
And that was my intention, was I needed these people. I needed them to do something for me.
Right.
And that was...
Which is immediately engaging.
It was weird to see how
Kat,
people reacted.
Did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Basically about the through line of the scenario. So people going to different rooms, if you have various...
There was connective tissue, and some of that connectivity would be, we had the grandmother up as one of our slides earlier, and if you went to the grandmother's room, which was like almost like a nursing home room, and she would talk to you as though she knew you, and she would ask you, do you have a letter for me? And some of the people did have letters for her, and those letters, she would ask them to read them aloud, so they would have to open up the letter, and then they would read the letter aloud, and it would be signed by them.
Well.
And they had been given that letter in an earlier room. Now I've divulged too much too. I'm in
Why?
trouble.
Is
I'm
that
in so
too
much
much?
trouble. But there was connective tissue between experiences that people had, and certainly thematically. I mean, there were definitely motifs. We spoke so much as a collaborative group about the issues that we were tackling. And so, again, the synthesis that I did was to take those themes and those motifs and to then wind them through or thread them through the piece. So I think in that way it was a holistic experience.
Did you have track A, track B, track C that people were sent on?
Was there track A, track B, track C that people were being sent on?
You mentioned that there was a penultimate experience. Did everybody have that?
Yes,
Everybody
there
had the
were a
penultimate
couple of experiences
Everybody
that
opened with similar experiences, but once they were cut loose,
Then they would go.
their choices
And
would
then-
determine their
okay.
destinies.
You had a question, yeah?
Given the kind of the wraparound of, the setup and the language, having grown up in Southern California with Scientology, and any number of actually pre-existing, before that, self-realization movements. I would wonder, going here, whether that element is unconsciously or consciously carried through in the way my experiences unfold. In other words, did that idea of self-actualization, or whatever you want to call it, become a through line in terms of how I experience it, or is that more a motif that is more of a subtext?
Well, the construct was definitely self-actualization, so there was a lot of language around reaching eye consciousness and being refitnessed.
But I think that it's something that is subtextual in the entire experience. But generally, once we would cut people loose, there wasn't a lot of directed, this is for your own good. One of the ways that it was subtextual or almost subconscious was there was always, when you were in the halls between the experiences, voiceover playing in the hallways. That was a similar voice to the one.
Congratulations, Roland Tec has reached eye consciousness.
Mm-hmm. So you'd be sort of hearing that language of the self-actualization.
But it wasn't within the
out there.
scenarios.
Yeah,
But it wasn't within the actual room.
It
No,
wasn't
it
within the
wasn't.
scenarios. And we went around this for a bit, and we talked about people could gain clarity points, but they never really did.
Andres, yeah?
Could you talk a little bit about the logistics of finances, like in a theater production, people, actors have to make...
Oh, talk about
stagehand.
the finances of doing this kind of a production, because actually, I'm curious, how many total actors were there every night there?
Oh, that is a good
Like
question.
12?
No.
15, 20?
20.
Roughly, 25?
30. There were
About
3
the
Freddies.
same number of audience members.
Um,
The one-on-one.
Well, I'll tell you.
It's interesting because the economics are a real big question, like how do you
The
make it work?
economics are a really big question. I mean, luckily for Sam and for me, we are not the production company ourselves.
Right.
So Bricolage was able, because they have such a great reputation and they've done such amazing work in Pittsburgh, they have a lot of support, and they were able to create a budget for the show. So I cannot tell you much about the finances except to say that, the experience is limited to few participants, and therefore it does become a question of how do you sustain a show for a long time when you only have a few participants and you have many actors. It's definitely a question, and I would say in this case, the project was an art project that was supported by the community, but if someone wanted to do this commercially, they would have to look at it in a different way and run it for a very long, or run it for a certain amount of time to recoup, yada, yada.
How much would the ticket cost if I want to experience this?
I think they had a variety of rates depending on artists, but I would say it was an expensive. I mean, not compared to New York in any way. I'm sorry, I've lived in Pittsburgh too long, so now it was actually a very inexpensive ticket in New York rates. But I don't know. Do you remember how much the tickets were?
I don't want to say because I'm not.
Yeah, but you could probably
Okay.
check that out online. It's
Okay.
probably there.
Yeah, question here?
I was wondering, did you ever get any really extreme reactions from the people going through this experience? And was it like doing psychotherapy with strangers?
Were there any extreme reactions from the audience members, and did any of it border on like psychotherapeutic?
Well, I mean, I have to recuse myself a little bit from answering this question and say that Sam and I were making a film we were shooting a film for a lot of the time that this was in performance, and we would go into the experience, but we didn't run. Once the show was up and running, we were not the people hard at work running it. So we would come in and experience it and watch it, but we were not on the ground. But from what I've heard...
And Cassie maybe can...
Yeah, there were some strong reactions, but the team that ran it, Caitlin, Roper, and I know Riley Harmon was up in the control room. They were like a well-oiled machine, and they were able to direct participants to safe places. And I know that there was a system of sort of safety within the whole construct as well to make sure that everyone always felt like they were okay. So I didn't really see any psychotherapy per se. I didn't really devolve into that from the experiences that I saw, but it was intense.
How long did it run?
Just for a month.
1 month. And is there any thought, did anybody ever, before you tore it all down, have anybody think about like, oh, we should take this on the road? Or?
Yeah, not on...
Or somewhere else, I don't know.
Yes, and we talked about extending, we talked about the it's really, I don't know the discussion of moving it ever really, because it was so specific to that site.
And what is going on in that building now?
I don't know.
Oh.
Do you want to do a show?
Sure.
Cassie, do you want to speak to the psychotherapy sort of?
No.
No.
I mean, I think the most, not necessarily violent reactions, but the most visceral reactions we had were actually people coming in who wanted to play the game. They were there to figure out what was going on, and I had people searching for Rob Clifton, and who was in charge of the Lies campaign, and they would come in, and if it had been their second time, they would cut me off and stop me talking. And I had one man offer to rescue me, and he said, "I will carry you out of here. I'll get you out of here." And it was kind of like, it was a very interesting experience to have that versus, I mean, in my room personally, I didn't have anyone get very emotional because it was, they weren't giving me much. They were taking mostly in my room. They were taking what I was giving them. I think there were a few reactions towards the end of experiences that people, they would get touched by something because you had to. At a certain point, if you allowed yourself to open up to the experience, there's no way that you couldn't be touched by something. And there were participants who were very emotional at the end, and it was fun for me, not fun, that's the wrong word, but it was nice for me to come, out of the dressing room afterwards. And there was one woman specifically, as soon as she heard her song playing when she exited the experience, she broke. And she couldn't function at that moment. And we sat her down, and the people who had been within her experience came out, and we all sat with her, and she just thanked us. And it was I wouldn't say it was psychotherapy necessarily, but I think it was therapeutic for some people.
I have a friend she is a professor of statistics, and she's rather dry, and she came through the experience, and it was profound for her. She didn't break down and cry. She didn't need psychotherapy, but I think yesterday, she brought up to me one of the rooms, and she's like, oh. There was a dancing room where you could dance with someone. And I don't know. I think that the idea of psychotherapy, I mean, some people had strong reactions, but I would say that, if you take someone to a good play and it has profound issues, that you can expect that they're going to break down. We took someone to a puppet play a couple of weeks ago. Sam and I took to It's Dark Outside. Oh, right. And we brought a friend with us, and she lost all of her baloney. It was so.
One of those, like, I don't know what's happening.
And there was nothing immersive about that experience. So I don't think that having a reaction to theater or to performance was exclusive to us in the sense of people needing therapy.
Yeah, it's kind of the beauty of theater in general, right? I mean, never know what you're going to get. Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Cassie. And thank you, Gab. And thank you, tweeting audience. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Roland.
This was really great. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you know more?
What?
Do you know more? Do you feel like you know more?